Welcome, comrade, to the Brotherhood. You are embarking on a fatal journey for which the end is clear. You are a fool to yourself to do this, for the very fact that you are here listening to this is thought crime enough that there will be no leniency. To keep going would be to go too far for your own good, but you have already gone too far to turn back. You are here because of your core desire to tear apart the autocracy of Oceania. You are one among us many courageous idiots that optimistically hope that if we strive for enough years, enough men sacrifice their lives for this calling, one day our descendants will know true freedom. But if you are to continue in your descent, you must know a few things about how this modern world operates. In the superstate, war is peace. Survive, superstates need their populations to acquiesce. They can maintain absolute control. The very enormity of the populations that give the ruling party such wide influence also creates inherent diversity. It becomes impossible to keep the billions united behind one cause and keep the state from fracturing without not only controlling their situation and actions, but also controlling their thoughts, feelings, knowledge, and emotions. Fortunately for the party, this is not nearly as difficult as it seems. To understand this, imagine a single human, isolated in his own bubble, floating around in a void. Everything that matters in his universe is him. Perhaps it can be theorized, since he has not received any stimulus, nothing to trigger his mind. He has not experienced any sort of thought. His brain is so as blank as the universe which surrounds him. This, though, is not fully true. Humans, as it turns out, are hard-coded to desire a limited number of things. The bare necessities of life: food, water, air, and heat. If this human is provided with these things, it can finally be assumed that he is completely blank slate. If someone, say, were to enter his bubble and inform him that, say, 2 + 2 = 5, he would simply believe it, simply because he has no reason to disbelieve it. Since he has no truth to compare it to, for him, this is the truth. Now say this human isn't isolated alone. He is among a society. Perhaps they even have cities and institutions. The creation of this blank slate human is more difficult. Though every member of the population from the moment they are born are constantly stimulated with a particular agenda, this would still be all they know or see. If nothing else enters from the outside to convince every person differently, assuming their basic necessities are always met, all they know or think is exactly what their controller want them to know or think. So thus, you can now see the core theory of how a superstate operates. They rely on total isolation, both physically and psychologically, from anything outside their universe. Now on Earth, this would be achieved through one of two ways. Either all of Earth is combined by one government, so there is really only one state. This, although ideal, is not realistic. The other, more feasible option, of course, is to have a few separate states that completely isolate their populations from each other. Now we reach the core of the party's existential dilemma: how to restrain its state in such a way that they receive zero influence from foreigners. No matter how extensive the physical control methods may be, they would never be sufficient enough. There will always be leakage, and if separated societies were to mingle, even a tiny amount, they would see a world outside of what the party wants them to see, compromising the society of the entire state. Thus, they not only have to obstruct a person's physical passage, but also their psychological urge to explore external possibilities. Thus, from the moment a child is born, from before they can even have the possibility of meeting someone from outside the state, they are preemptively indoctrinated with the idea that every philosophy other than that promoted by the party is a fundamental moral outrage. They must see it as so definitively egregious that they should never even want to associate themselves with it by communicating with someone from the other side. But if only one state were to do this, people from the other states may still be able to enter the indoctrined state, effectively destroying the party's design. Thus, this would only work if all states pursued the same strategy. In other words, all states would have to be pretty much philosophically, idealistically, and politically identical. So thus, there are 3 superstates, but ultimately, only one party. This, however, creates an even more volatile situation, an even greater dilemma for the party that, once again, it is now even more important that there is no chance that populations of separate states intermingle. If they were to find out that all the government systems were the same, it would deconstruct the very core of the party's grasp around the people's lives. For this, the party created the war. You see, there's no real point to the war. Each superstate declares that they will one day be able to conquer the other two states and make their party the ruling class of the world. But for now, for two reasons, this could never happen. The first is quite obvious. Each state is enormous in terms of population, size, quantity of resources. They are each quite nearly unconquerable. The second reason, though, is a bit more obscure and far more significant. All three superstates have essentially the same overall strategy. They forge an alliance with one state, saying that they will work together to destroy the third state. While they win their trust, they surround him, they break their alliance, and they execute their superstate. They execute a surprise attack in an attempt to conquer them. But since all the states have this exact strategy, it can never ultimately succeed for any of them. What this does, though, is create an endless cycle of alliances being formed and broken, battles being declared and peace treaties signed, a war that has been fought since the beginning of the superstates that will continue until their ends. War, though, requires many resources. To farm or build these resources, manpower is needed. This is why it often seems that although the parties say they are fighting to conquer each other, they are most often fighting not over territories of their states, but over the large disputed area around the equator. This area contains a large portion of the world's population and provides an excellent source of labor to manufacture and produce goods for the war effort. These populations, however, live in an area that are constantly changing hands, so that they can't be indoctrinated from birth towards one of the superstates as everybody else is. Thus, states don't want to keep them for too long, knowing that they cannot risk integrating them with the rest of the state society. Thus, states continuously conquer new territories while they lose their old ones, creating a constant war and a constant need for war supplies, which creates a constant need for more production territories, which leads to more war. Now, this may seem nonsensical. Why would the states continue to fight if they know that it's unnecessary, that they would prosper more in a ceasefire? This leads to a second important reason why superstates are never conquered. It is politically advantageous for them to remain separate and for war to continue for eternity. The reason for this leads all the way back to the core of the party system. The bare fact that we started with humans are hardwired only to crave the bare necessities. Other than that, everything's influenced by what's around them. If there was peace, the party would easily manage to generously feed every member, practically to excess. However, the party knows that their control relies on the fact that the people rely on them for their core necessities. If people were able to live more comfortably, they would begin to doubt their reliance on the government. Further, every person must have a job with the party. They must believe they are working for their very existence. If there was no war, this huge workforce would produce an enormous, unnecessary excess of goods. Since many people's duties would be made obsolete, they would seek occupation elsewhere, allowing them to doubt the importance or need for the party. The war then creates a need for continuous production that does not directly benefit the population. With this method of production and total usage, creates a negative feedback system within each person and within the society. If the society produces too little, their instinct to react to lack of food kicks in, making them work harder to produce more. If they produce too much, the surplus is siphoned into the war effort. Thus, the people will get exactly barely enough to survive, and the party can maintain its control for eternity. So, fighting continues, despite that every person agrees. Each superstate declares it will conquer the others, but that is impossible and none even intend to. The war seems like a conflict with outside powers, but in truth, it is more importantly a way for each party to retain control over themselves. Thus, war is peace. For the superstate, ignorance is strength. Since the beginning of human history, an hierarchy has existed. There's always been a high class, a middle class, in a low class. Epochs have changed, wars fought and won, and lost, new governments formed, but in the end, it's all the same. These three castes are defined by their role in society. The greatest minority is the high class. Ultimately, their role is to own, and their aim is to control and to remain in power. The middle class, the educated workforce. They were brought up going to school, learning a particular trade that requires intellect, but importantly, do not own or control anything significant themselves. The low class is by far the greatest in population. Their purpose is to fulfill the grunt work of the labor needed by the middle and high class for which intellectual education is not needed, and to reproduce and maintain the population of physical laborers. Ultimately, they have no inherent aim. Their entire world is dictated by what the high and middle class show them and ask of them. Each person's main concern is their own survival, their own life. So all that is important to the low class fits within exactly one generation. To live, to eat, to breathe. The primary purpose of the middle class, however, is to innovate and advance society, a task which turns out to be largely unsuccessful. This is because their innovations are double-faceted. They create technological innovations that improve people's quality of life. They're also tasked with making societal and political innovations. Unfortunately, the primary purpose of the second type of innovation is to control the distribution of the first. Because the high class is in power and the middle class has the first access, this distribution never actually changes. Thus, although the quality of a person's life in general has undeniably improved since barbaric times, the system of hierarchy has never fundamentally changed. Now we come to the importance of the middle class's ultimate aim, which is to remove the high class and to install themselves in their place. This is because as time goes on, the middle class becomes gradually more discontented by the fact that the high class remains in power and is the majority owner of the society, despite the middle class being equally, if not more, qualified and deserving. Unfortunately for them, they do not have the power single-handedly to overthrow the high class. So they enlist the support of the low class. Bringing in the low class to overthrow the high class can be done in three overall steps. First, the middle class does what it knows how to do best. It innovates. The members of the society of the class create a new philosophical and social and ideological system that they can present to the low class. The new system must pander to their aims as shown earlier. It must, in some way, allow them to eat, survive, and breathe in greater abundance and ease. Once the system is designed, it is vivaciously presented by the middle class to the low class. The low class is effectively educated in a way that benefits the new system. Once they've been thoroughly educated, they will take down the high class by themselves. At this point, the greatest problem in the cycle arises. The low class cannot assume their newly won position because they're not sufficiently educated. So it is easy for the middle class, which the low class has built a deep trust in, to come in and take the position of the high class. The fact is, though, that the low class is not even sufficiently educated to assume the middle class position, the innovators. The former high class, though they have been overthrown, have a legacy of education and easily assume the unfilled position of the middle class. Thus, every time this cycle repeats, the middle and high class switch places through the work of the low class, whose position never changes. However, even if societal innovation is unsuccessful, technological innovation is. The very core of why the hierarchy remains is due to the fact that basic necessities must be produced. And to do this, manual labor, no matter how advanced the societal structure is, will always be a necessity. Since technological innovation is inevitable that at some point technology would take the place of human manual labor. This occurred sometime near the beginning of the 20th century. At this point, real equality could theoretically be achieved. For this to occur, technology would have to become more widespread, diminishing the need for manual labor. The younger generation of low-class members would be able to dedicate their time to education, at which point they could join the middle class and work towards furthering the improvement of technology. They would also adopt the aim of the middle class, to overthrow the upper class. Since at this point, the middle class has grown so powerful and large, eliminating the high class would be easy and could be done without the now obsolete low class. The former high class would then join the middle class, of course, and the difference between the castes would no longer exist. So why, you may ask, did this not occur? While it is mostly due to the aim of the high class to remain in power, observationally, it seems that the cycle has always been occurring and would continue to occur forever. But something was different this time. The difference was that the then middle class finally had a greater perspective on history and a great enough understanding about the role of technology in eliminating castes to artificially arrest the process. You see, the main reason why for all of human history the high class would get overthrown despite their efforts to prevent it was because they did not have the ability to look back and observe a pattern. The then middle class finally did this and saw that even if they managed to take power, they would inevitably lose it, because that's how it always happens. As it turns out, there's really only two ways in which the high class can lose power. Either one, the state is attacked and defeated from the outside, or they are overthrown by a low class from within. Due to the creation of three superstates and the cycle of war, option one could not happen. To eliminate option two, the high class would have to address the two steps that were described earlier. They would have to prevent the new middle class from being able to formulate a plan, and they would have to B, prevent the low class from becoming sufficiently educated to carry that plan out. As expected, when the revolution occurred, three distinct castes emerged. Now they were called the inner party, the outer party, and the bottom class was the proletariat or the proles. So what did the new class do differently? The new high class do differently? First, a fourth class was created. This caste was occupied by a singular entity which at once provided both personification for the new party for the people of all castes to rally around, and a person in power above the high class who could never be overthrown. In Oceania, his name is Big Brother. He is everywhere yet nowhere. He is always seen yet never seen. He is known by everyone yet no one knows him. The only thing about him that is known is his role and aim, finally wrapped up in one: absolute supremacy. He gives an image for this role that people can learn to support, but his physical presence makes him impossible to overthrow. The real high class, though, knows that past high class have fallen due to inequity in ownership. They know that despite the fact that ownership is what outwardly defines them, they, as high class members, the only significant part of their role is the control. By vanquishing ownership officially and subscribing to collectivism, the high class can then join the middle class without sacrificing power or luxury. In this way, they begin to address the first step of overthrow. Since there's no high class, the real middle class has no one to blame and create a revolt against. Unfortunately, this is not perfect because the outer party members will have to be educated to perform their role in society. So there's always a risk that they will figure out the vice of their society and decipher a way to overthrow it. The only way to prevent this is to prevent them from ever having dissident thoughts in the first place. This is done by creating a clear and effective system of observation and repercussion. Every moment of an inner party member's life is observed. Telescreens are positioned everywhere. No corner is out of sight, and every person knows this. They see the telescreens. They hear themselves being reprimanded for not performing perfectly. If anyone appears to be even slightly suspicious in their behavior, the thought police swoop down and arrest them. They immediately disappear and become a member of the enemy, the unseen root of all evil. Even if they were not in fact dissident, the thought police takes no risk and never takes anything back. This not only removes the possibility of a revolt ever occurring, but also discourages anyone from even considering thinking about creating a new system. The idea in itself is not something new. For centuries, tyrannies around the world have tried to institute extreme observation. The only reason extreme observation to protect their controls, but the only reason that the party ultimately succeeds is because, unlike their predecessors, they are able, through the advancement in their technology, to see people's thoughts. Thus, the party not only has the ability to control what a member does, it is also able to control what they think and feel. However, it could still could be potentially possible for a well-disciplined person to hide their thoughts, but the party has developed a way to address this as well. As discussed earlier, the society of each state can be seen as an isolated universe. Each person knows nothing other than what the party tells him. He has no ability that the party does not grant him personally to be physically able to devise a revolution. A revolutionary philosophy, a party member would have to understand what is going on around them. They must understand the past, then they must be able to formulate their own ideas. All this understanding, philosophizing, and interpretation requires one basic thing: the right words. Thus, the party has deemed that although they cannot ultimately unfailingly control a person's thoughts, if they remove the words to describe any sort of insubordination from a person or dissidence, he will be unable to carry out such a thought. This is the core of the need for newspeak, the party's new language, which they are developing and are planning to fully implement. It has no words to describe emotions or bad situations or anything other than what the party wants. Once it is the lingua franca, thought crime will be psychologically impossible. Now the second step of the revolt must be addressed: the proles becoming educated enough to either overthrow the high class or join the middle class. As described earlier, the low class's education relies on the technology and the influence of the middle class. First, the technology must take care of some of the manual labor that the low class would do. Then the middle class would feed them the information. Now, since the party has absolute control over the middle class, they can control both the technology and the information that the proles receive. First, they eliminate the development of technology that could take the place of manual labor and improve the quality of life. Thus, the proles are continuously kept occupied producing goods. But since there are so many proles, they produce far more than society would ever need. The party cannot allow these to be used, though as that would increase the people's quality of life. Instead, as described earlier, it is siphoned into a war effort. So the proles must keep working and no surplus goods are received by anyone. Secondly, and more importantly, the party controls what they can know. Since the party controls everything within its isolated universe and people have nothing external to compare it to, the party can control what people know or think. For all time, humans have studied history. The thing about history, though, is that it is impresent and unprovable. When a person is taught a history lesson, it is something past, something transient. They hear it from someone else, or often read it from a book written by another person. We have always trusted what we are hearing, that what we are hearing is correct, despite the fact that we have no direct proof. Since that past has already happened, one cannot revisit it. The factuality of how it is retold does not, in truth, really matter. The only reason we have ever retold history as we truly believe it was is because we all mutually silently agreed that this was somehow right. This is how the party can get away with carrying out a pointless war or randomly arresting people, or can prevent the cycle of change from coming again. They dictate what happened in the past. They can dictate what should happen in the future. If the proles can't know that a revolution is possible, they simply won't revolt. But this raises one final conundrum. Editing all of history is an enormous task. It can only be accomplished through the work of scores of party members. So, if the inner party, the educated middle class, can see distinctive proof of the party's facetiousness while they're editing the history, wouldn't that trigger them to create a revolution? The answer to this is called doublethink. Doublethink is a newspeak word for a process which is deeply indoctrinated in each partisan from when they are a child. Doublethink is the ability for a member to hold two exactly contradictory thoughts in the mind at the same time. To understand this, take, for example, a party member is tasked with recreating the number of available chocolate bars. The fact that he sees is on the paper is that there are 200, but he decides to change it to 400. But at this point, he knows that two truths. There are 200 and 400 chocolates. He knows the real truth is 200, and that 400 is a lie. However, as soon as he writes down 400, he must accept that this new truth, despite the fact that he knows that the truth was 400 just a moment ago, is in fact the truth throughout the entire process. It is necessary for him to see the original fact as truth and the new fact to be able to lie about it and constantly change it, but he must know that it is the truth because the party deems it so. Even the word doublethink in itself is an act of doublethink because it governs a clear manipulation of the truth. But a party member always knows that truth has not been manipulated. They must always not know that the truth of about the party, even though they're the ones carrying it out. Thus, ignorance is strength. Comrade, your bravery is noted. Congratulations. This is all for for now.